I'm learning things already. Hi, everybody. Yeah, that is weird. So I'm David. This is Scott. Gonna try not to stand in the way of the projector most of the time. We should be okay. Go back. We're not. Hey. Yeah. Yeah, you can read that. Which camera am I blocking? Yeah, okay. So this is just to talk about things that we found in Ember, working with Ember on a large Ember app for the past months to a year. Scott's been working on it over a year. Yeah. Talk to Scott. He's experienced. But yeah, just a couple of things that we found surprising or confusing that you may encounter if you're starting up with Ember, or some of the things are kind of specific to the experience of upgrading from Ember 0.9 to 1.4. But yeah, some small experiences that we've had. Some disclaimers. We're not trying to be mean here. We're not trying to slag Ember. We love Ember and we work with Ember every day for a reason. We just have very high standards thanks to Ember as well. So the first thing that I kind of found really confusing when I was just starting out with Ember was that if you have prototype extensions turned on, which you should because they're really cool, Ember modifies what a kind of native JavaScript array looks like. You get all of these extra methods, which is nice, I guess. I didn't really know what they did, but you can guess that you have this new observer behavior, and it's like, wow, yeah, I always wanted to be able to tell an array, hey, if you get modified, just let me know. That would be great. So I was like, hey, I'll start playing with this. I want to observe arrays. So I made a new array. And I was like, hey, let me know if stuff changes. I didn't intuitively know that at each was the way to do that, but I'd seen a few Ember guides, so I was like, oh, I'll give this a try. And I started modifying the array, and nothing happened. Because Ember adds all these observer things, but it doesn't modify the native array functions, which is a good thing. You know, you shouldn't modify native functions that already exist. You should only add new things if they're not still there. And I eventually found you need to use this other method called pushObject, and then your observer gets fired, and it's all cool. I'm not really sure why it's called pushObject, but it is. Tom's not allowed to ask questions. I hear that reason all the time, and it's anyway. So that's array observers, and I think they're really cool. I think they're really useful, and it's quite nice having your native arrays modified in that way. I wouldn't change it, but it is confusing, and you have to learn to use these different array methods. So watch out for that. And now Scott's going to talk about more observer stuff along with init.
Yeah. So just another thing that it's things that we just come across as we're developing and might not be so obvious. So in this code example, we have just a new Ember object, and we have an init function, and then it sets my value, and then we have an observer that you'd expect to fire when my value changes. This was surprising for us because, as David said, we used Ember 0.9 for a good while, and then we transitioned to 1.4 now. So this used to work for us, and it would work all the time. So then we upgraded to 1.4, and you're like, oh, why is my code not working here? So now it is documented as such. So it's not, if you spend days and days reading all the documentation, make sure you get it right, you will come across this dot on init. So basically what happens now is init fires, sets your value, and your observer then fires straight after init fires. That's what the dot init does. So now you can do whatever you want in your function. Now, a slight downside to this is, as we've also come across, that within your observer function, you might have a bit of code, say, setting another property elsewhere that you were always expecting there to be a value on it. So an example in our code base was we had two different sources of info for a property. So we had an observer observing one of them, and we used to always have a value for it. So it was a phone number in the application or whatever. So when the phone number changes, we would go and then change phone number elsewhere in another property. So then we upgrade to 1.4, and that stops working. And we're like, oh, what's going on here? So check the documentation, add dot on init. Works somewhat. we're now setting it when the code runs, and we've got an undefined value for the phone number. It's like, oh, what's going on here? So it's just a little caveat you might want to do. If you've written it, you might, in such a way, you need to do a check for all your null values or incorrect values. It's unlikely you'll come across that unless you are migrating from an older version of Ember, unfortunately, like we were. But that's just how we deal with it. We also, like an example is, we also have another function. We have this did init extension, or like function, that essentially does the on init behavior for you. So you could do your setters in there, and then your observers should work after that. It's just something to be aware of. That's just the idea of this talk, just to cover all these sort of things for us. And David's got another thing to talk about here now.
So yeah, we use observers a lot. You may be figuring out at this stage. And one of the things that really tripped us up with the upgrade was that computed properties are lazy, which again is a very good thing. The app shouldn't be going and computing a bunch of data you're not going to use. Your computed properties only get run the first time somebody does a get on them, and then they're cached after that. It's really great behavior. It's a really excellent default. But where this becomes confusing is when you combine that behavior with observers. Observers in isolation, you say function and then dot observes the name of a property. You kind of assume, regardless of how that property is constructed, when that property changes, your observer will be called. But if the property you're observing is a computed property, and nobody ever does a get on that property, then your observer won't fire. I apologize for putting this big object definition on one slide and the exercise of that object on the next. It wouldn't fit in one. But if you bear with me, just remember that num is a real property. It's a number. Numprop is a computed property based on that number. Don't worry about one way. That just means it points at the first property. I know it might seem weird to even have something that does that, but it exists. Numprop, whenever you get it, will give you the value of num. If you attempt to set numprop, it won't do anything. And then we have these two observers. Okay, working is a working observer. It does exactly what you would expect. It observes the num property. If anybody updates num, working will get called. Not working is not working until the numprop property has been gotten or somebody's done a get on that property. Okay, so if we exercise that object a little bit, if we set num, then the working observer is fired. We log yay to the console. The not working observer is not fired, which is strange. But if we then get the numprop computed property, it now gets computed for the first time, and we see that it does have the correct value. Okay, num was set to 20, numprop is equal to 20. Things are working well enough. And then after we've done that get, if we set num again, we see our not working observer is now working. Everything's fine. Excuse me for my silly log messages. So that works, but it is kind of slightly unexpected because, again, the semantics of observers, like if I had my way, calling observes would automatically get the property the first time. So observes is like, it counts as a get. It counts as a registration of real interest in this property. But this is still fine and workable, and there are excellent reasons for this behavior. As I said, the fact that computed properties are lazily loaded is a really good thing. So I mean, what we do when we see this kind of problem in our code base, and it's rare enough because most of your properties are going to appear in templates, which counts as a get, or various other things, and you should be fine most of the time. But if I have a computed property that I want to observe, and it's not in a template or something, I'll say, I should have put this code example in there, but bear with me for a second. I'll say .observes, and then I'll also run it on init, and I'll have like inside of the observer check if the property is equal to something, and then it's fine. And in most observers, you'll be checking against the property anyway. You'll be doing a get on that property. So it's manageable. But again, might be confusing and surprising, so watch out for computed properties plus observers. And that's pretty much it for us. The documentation does cover the two second examples we talked about. So like this is in the documentation. This is not like weird stuff that they don't tell you. There are absolutely good paragraphs and stuff about this in the guides. We can reference those links in the meetup later. Yeah, and that's our Ember surprise talk. Thanks very much. Yeah. Anyone except for Tom.
Come on, go.
So for what it's worth, we made all those changes for performance reasons. I was convinced by Chris Selden that they were good for performance. And actually there are some cases, especially around observers, where you write the code and you set it in an it and it doesn't fire and you're like, what the hell? But there was an entire other case of people who were like, why is the observer firing it? Of course it's already set, what the hell, right? So this is actually one of the hardest parts about API design is the what the hell factor, which is that depending on what vector you're approaching the problem, you're like the way that you want work seems like totally obvious. I don't know. In many of these cases, I agree with you, but a lot of them do for performance. So sorry.
No, thanks for the context.